series has been and so today I'm over the moon and really, really chuffed to be able to let you know who we have with us. We have Nahar, who's joined us from the UK and from Solace Women's Aid. Nahar has been working in the sector for over 20 years, and Solace Women's Aid is one of the pioneering services that started in the UK around providing support around domestic abuse. And we have Rhonda Fleming, who's coming from Pittsburgh's Women and Girls Shelter, and again is pioneering in the space of prevention around domestic and sexual violence, and in particular around responding to young people and children who've experienced it. Rhonda very much had a moment, has done phenomenal work around the Hands Are Not for Hurting curriculum, and has been working alongside the team at the Pittsburgh Women and Girls Shelter for well over 20 years. And of course, we have Pamela, who is No More CEO, and she's been in the sector for about 20 years. So we've been in this work for a while. So we thought it was a great opportunity for us to sort of really dig into what are the experiences, or what does it feel like to be a child who's living in a home and witnessing and experiencing domestic abuse. But sort of before I jump into my questions and allow our incredible panel to start giving their insights and sort of experiences in the space, I thought it would be a great moment to really talk about what is a child and who are the children that we'll be talking about through this session. So for obvious reasons, we think child, we think little person, either somebody that we parent or somebody that we are a caring adult to, or somebody that we pass in the street. Those are the young people in our lives, in our communities and our environments. But actually, when we talk about being a child who's grown up in a home where domestic abuse has happened, that could also mean you as the adult and talking to your child that still lives inside of you, or the fact that you're, your adult parent, you're an adult, and now your parent has entered into another relationship or a different relationship and they're experiencing abuse. That relationship between parent and child and how that sort of manifests is something that we will talk to and talk about through the session. But I thought it was really important for us to highlight that we continue to be children to our parents, even though we grow older and older, and sadly they do too, and we learn from that. So sort of jumping into those questions, I think it's also really important to say that we have so few statistics about how many children are living in homes and experiencing domestic abuse. We have numbers that say just over 15 million children in the US are currently living in a home and experiencing domestic abuse. And in the UK, the number is loosely 1 million children living in homes and experiencing or witnessing domestic abuse. So you could potentially translate that, and I've heard it said quite frequently, that 1 in 5 children in any kindergarten or preschool or very early primary school could be living in a home where domestic abuse is happening. But I know that Pamela and Nahar and Rhonda would agree with me that whenever you go into a space to train or to give awareness around domestic abuse, that it could be 30 people in that, 30 adults in that room, and there will guarantee to be a number of people who will feel safe and able to to disclose that they grew up in a home. So we do not have the numbers on the number of adults who sit amongst us, our friends and our family members that grew up in homes where they witnessed or experienced domestic abuse. So we know that it is at epidemic proportions, and we know that it has a significant impact. So Rhonda, I'm going to jump to you straight away and put you right on the spot there. In your experience, and I know that you've done extensive work in the support that you offer to children, it's not only based within the shelter, but also within the wider community. What are the primary ways in which domestic abuse or violence can affect children, both in the short and the long term?
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. So actually, when we look at this, as you just said, it could be 15 million, and we know the numbers aren't exact. It's so many different homes. That means children are affected in many different ways. Children living in the same household are not all affected the same way in the short term and in the long term. So someone who is living in a home, or children who are living in home where there's domestic violence, there's one child who may come out. We used to have a phrase that we coined that we use: sweetie, snotty, and spooky. And it just referred to the sweetie child wants everything to be exactly right. That's your A student, your A plus student. They want, because they believe that by getting A's in school, the domestic violence, the abuse will end, or they believe it's their fault. So they think anything they can do is going to make it better. So that's the sweetie child. And then the spooky child is just afraid of everything. Anything, they believe everything is just going to go wrong anyhow. So it doesn't matter what they do. It's just not going to get any better. And when by the snotty child, that's the child who emulates the abuse. That's the child who emulates that behavior and believe that that's justifiable and that's the behavior that they should use to get what they want in life. So when we're looking at short-term and long-term impact, that can happen in different ways. Certainly children in elementary school may not be so friendly, don't reach out, don't want to be playful, or don't want to play. Then, of course, growing up into that young adulthood age, in their relationship, you're going to see some of those similar behaviors. So you have the person child who grows up and they are likely to be in that same kind of relationship where they seen growing up at home, and or someone who will repeat the same behavior that the person in their home who was using abuse and control, they may become that person as well. So it really, again, it can vary from child to child, even in the same home. So those consequences can affect them later in life. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I think it's really key, isn't it, that like we are really sort of accepting that those that experience domestic or sexual violence are their journey is unique to themselves, and that actually we need to respond to their needs and see them as individuals and their experience. And I think, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Nahar, how would you say, or how do you see really, and through your services, how do children generally process and cope with the trauma of witnessing and experiencing domestic violence, abuse?
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, absolutely agree with Rhonda, just how individual each experience is and the reactions to the trauma that they've been through. I suppose the what I see in the refuges that Solace has across London, and previous experiences is the various kind of physical manifestations and the impact. So you see, children being very anxious, being very depressed, having very low self-esteem, difficulty in terms of healthy relationships and maintaining healthy relationships, which is one of the key areas that Solace focuses on in our children and young people's work. I mean, for younger children, I mean, it doesn't happen with older children, but our experience is difficulty sleeping, having those nightmares, in terms of the kind of physical aspect of bedwetting, for example, and then seeing that delayed development, and deterioration in their communication skills, and then maybe for some, in terms of some of the older children, what we see is kind of school attendance, in terms of being very poor, leading to exclusion, and I mean, and one kind of key aspect, I suppose, across that we see across children is that kind of inconsistency of how to regulate their emotions, and that can lead to being aggressive and withdrawn, and in some cases them not wanting to be visible in front of their family and other professionals, and then leading to perhaps, in terms of self-harm, and drug taking. So we do see a kind of distinction between preschool children in terms of their behavioral difficulties, and then the older children in terms of kind of their social networks and antisocial behavior. So yes, and I think, but looking at in terms of the positive, again, some of the work that we're doing within Solace, in our programs, is that they, as Rhonda was saying, we have very, very, very individual approaches. So we need that individual space for children and young people to express what they've seen. I mean, we're really pleased in this country that children are now recognised as victims in their own right for domestic abuse, which is very welcomed. The challenge, unfortunately, is that wasn't really followed up with any real funding. So so we got to be grateful on one hand, but not on the other. So yes, so there's different kind of we approach it in terms of our interventions and supporting them with their recovery, just in terms of making sure that there's more tailored interventions. So whether that's group work or one-to-one work, we have a program that works with young minoritized women. So in terms of looking at kind of some of those intersectional barriers in terms of how they would cope, and boys as well, I suppose what we found is much more difficult to engage, especially if they come into refuge with mum. Then they need one-to-one work. But when you do engage them, they're very interested in in being solution focused. And again, just in terms of kind of stopping that cycle of a child that's experienced domestic abuse, and putting that recovery in place so that they don't go on to become a perpetrator in the future. So, Lindsay, I hope that answered the question, but that's kind of from my experience.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think there's something that we're picking up that's sort of really clear in this is that, yes, we know that not every child will present or their behavior would be the same, but it sounds as if there's a whole host of behaviors that will happen. And that if actually we're not able to unpick what is going on with those behaviors, we'll never get to the crux of what's causing it. And so those children are often, and, sort of pushed to the side potentially, or sort of excluded because their behavior isn't meeting the norms of a classroom, but potentially they're at risk. And how do we delve into that? So we'll come back to that, I'm certain. But Pamela, how do you think the experiences in some ways of what's happening as children has a knock-on effect if you're slightly an older child?
I think if you're an older child, then you have the sense of responsibility that, you don't hold your own space. Do you have to protect a parent, for example? Or also you might start questioning your own role as a child. Like, you stop in a way moving from your childhood, I just place and ideas to actually become a protector or a grown-up. And we can see that a lot in shelters, for example, right? Where it's an interesting one. This was always a conversation in the shelters, and Lindsay and I worked many years in them, and it was this idea where the children have actually been sometimes bodyguards, or they had known where the parent was coming, they knew the situation, they knew a lot of was coming, and all of a sudden when they came to the shelter, the staff members wanted to treat them like little children again. And so we could see, especially on the older ones, that they had lost the control that they have of trying to understand the dynamics of the abuse, that they felt kept them safe. In the refuge, they were back to not having information. Caseworkers wouldn't talk around them. So, from one day to another, you were hearing so much. And then all of a sudden, so even when trying to provide support, you have to be really careful about the experiences of the children around you and how they've been provided support.
I think that's a really key point, isn't it? It's the fact that we all know that we feel more in control of things when we have as much information as possible, but our first instance is to sort of hide what's going on from our children to keep them safe. And then when you start working with services or the police or whomever you are choosing to work with, the first instinct from them is to separate the child so they can move back into that child's space. I mean, I will always say, I remember lots and lots of little adults arriving at the refuge. And then my goal was always to see little, children leave. But the journey from being a too young an adult to moving back to a child, you would think is quite a nice one for a child, but it's stripping lots away. It's taking from them again. And so I'd love to hear, Naha, like, how are you guys managing that within your services?
I'm sorry, did you say Rhonda?
Yeah, I'll
Oh,
start
okay,
with
I'm
you, Rhonda.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
Sorry, I
sorry
should have
that you
said
said
one
Rhonda.
person.
So certainly in our program that we have a children's advocacy program, and our children's advocacy program really allow children to be children and to be where they are, whether that's in a given moment where they're having a difficult moment. Some of the children who come to the program are they're glad to be there. They're away from the danger at home, and we of course create a safe space for them. And so they're the best way I can put it is they behave well. It's the behavior you want to see. But there's obviously no judgment on the child. But when I'm saying that, then there's other children who actually are crying, and some of the behaviors that Nahar explained as well. We're going to see some of the aggression, even in the little children. So you may see some of the aggression, you see the isolation. So you see a lot of different behaviors. And I think what is really the best thing that we do is to just be there, be present with the child. Also, we obviously have a lot of activities that we do. We partner with a lot of community-based programs that come in. The museum comes in and they bring, different animals, or, uh, stuffed animals or other animals that they actually, different activities with the children, and then do allow them that space to be a child, regardless of what they have seen. I like the statement, they come in as a refugee and leave out as a child. I like that statement because we like to see the children also while they're in the center, at Women's Center Shelter. We like to see them be able to just be themselves. So that's very important. So, yeah, thank you.
Anything you'd like to add, Naha?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to Rhonda. I think what's often when women come into our refuges, they sometimes say they would have come sooner, but they were worried about their child and impacting on their lives. And then we often, I mean, the feedback is universally, usually, we're really glad we did this because we can see the change in our child who's happier, and they're more confident, and we can see that then as staff as well, in terms of that difference when that child came in who was very anxious and timid, and then they're babbling away to the workers and feeling more confident. And I think one key area for us that we've recognized is having family support workers, so having dedicated workers that are there for the children. So as Rhonda was saying, it involving them activities, this whole change in routine, which is so huge, in terms of moving schools. It's to kind of help them adapt to that, and to see some positive results. So yeah, I suppose that's kind of our response, but also, we try different things and we tried different interventions. So one intervention we tried, which was actually funded by the Youth Empowerment Fund, was something called emotion coaching, where we did some work, and we really tried to involve, especially kind of the younger children. 6 to 14 was the age group, where we did a kind of a joint parenting program with them, and the aim was to kind of reduce these behavioural difficulties that we were talking about earlier, but also trying to improve that emotional regulation for mum and child, and that could sometimes be involved in group sessions. So we would do discussion and role play and case studies, and minimizing harsh parenting would be a discussion, and kind of having that kind of stronger emotional connection. And families fed back to us that they found it really important and transformational. So yeah, so we want to do more of that work, as well as complementing the kind of everyday work that the family support workers are doing, in terms of just being that positive role model. Yeah, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. So I suppose, in like, sort of to sum up this sort of set of questions, is that when a child's living in a home where they're experiencing domestic abuse, there's a lot of things that they are actively doing to keep their family safe. There's a level of responsibility they may hold. They may feel that they need to keep everything secretive. They may be encouraged to keep everything secretive. Then all of a sudden, people know that domestic abuse is happening, and you move into the next sort of step in that journey, which is either working with a shelter, a refuge, or an advocate. And now all these people know everything. And you're, as a child, trying to decipher, what should I be saying? My relationship with my parent has changed. All these things are happening, which are different. But there are some amazing moments in that. And I'll always sort of refer back to this, there's people that you meet in life who tell you something that will stick with you like super glue to your soul. And years ago, actually, for a services which are based in Camden, I was buying a sofa in a sofa store, and the person I was buying the sofa from, the salesperson was sort of like, why does it need to be so hard wearing? Why does it need to be wipeable? Why and I was like, no, well, I can't tell exactly where it's going, but it's going into sort of a supported accommodation. And he said, oh, is it anything to do with domestic abuse? I'm like, well, no, it's supported accommodation. And he then shared that in the early 80s, he'd gone into a women's refuge, actually the first refuge in the UK, interestingly enough. And he said that he was about 4 or 5 at the time, and he will never forget 2 things from that time that he spent there. One of them was obviously that, he had an immense group of friends and going to school and sort of moving into this new moment in his life was supported by the fact he was in community. But the second one, which I think is the bit that stuck to my soul, is that he said that he heard his mom laugh for the very first time in her life. And he said, but my mom's body changed. The shape of my mum changed. And I was like, well, I get, is that losing weight? Is it sort of getting a bit fitter? What is it? Have you picked up, what could it be? And he said, no, I didn't realize she was as tall as she was because it was the first time she stood up tall. And I think for me, that's always been the moment where we sort of said, actually, the impact on children being in that refuge and being supported in those services is so powerful. It sort of takes us into who we are as adults in many ways. And sort of moving on to that next question, and I'm going to jump to you, Pamela, sort of really dig into that, is that when we talk about child, we sort of see them up into 16. We don't recognize sort of after the fact. But in your experience, Pamela, how does viewing and experiencing and witnessing domestic abuse have an impact on your adult interpersonal relationships? From being your first romantic relationship, being all the way through into in your, couple of relationships down the line, your marriage, all the way until, you know, if that marriage you decide to separate, how does it impact you with regards to your relationships?
You know, I am specifically very passionate about that topic because I think there's many people walking around the world that have seen domestic violence as children and then struggle to form their own relationships as they grow up. And I think we don't talk enough about that. And so, of course, we have some ideas around potentially normalizing some toxic behaviors, but I think I like to kind of deep a little bit more into that. And the bits that scare me the most is the idea that when we're forming relationships, we are attracted immediately to familiar patterns. We don't know that. We might have swore to all the gods that we will never be in an abusive relationship, that that's not going to happen to us. But actually, the first thing that attracts us, kind of, you know, this idea of, you know, falling in love, you know, when you see somebody or very quickly, is this familiar attraction to something that you have seen as a child, making whatever happens to you as a child so kind of deeply, deeply important. The other thing is this idea of self-seeking validation. And sometimes you might want to seek validation on a new partner that you think is too good for you. So if in your mind, your self-esteem is very, very low and has been crushed because maybe your abusive parent crushed your mothers and all the families in the process, then this idea of I'm going to go out with the prettiest girl in the school, or I'm going to go out with, you know, a rich man, somebody who people would look at me and think, oh, you know, Pamela couldn't get that guy. And so seeking validation from these new partners becomes an issue. With that, attachment disorders. So, you know, we're talking more and more about, you know, avoidant types, for example, where children have had to protect their parents and they don't want to be and this is all happening at subconscious level when they start dating. But if they see that somebody is too needy, at the moment that they feel like they are loved, they might actually separate or step a step back. And then they might start forming also toxic patterns of behavior with their new partners. If they're seeking somebody who represents that, and at the same time, you know, they are avoiding it, you might also kind of get that. Some people overcompensate in relationships. Again, trying to, you know, this will never happen to me. This will never happen to me. So I have to make sure my husband is really happy. If he's really, really, really happy, then, you know, this won't distress me, or, you know, or the same thing. And then you have the complete opposite, which is, I don't want this to happen to me. I will never marry. I will never form a meaningful relationship. And people, you know, I will not have children, for example, many times stems from the fact that somebody, you know, has actually witnessed domestic abuse. It could be also a choice. So I think the only thing I want to say with that is that to anybody who has experienced domestic abuse as a child, that has witnesses, or they know that it was happening in their environment, to just assess how they're forming new relationships. Healing is possible. Doing your own work about how these things affect is possible. So, you know, you're not condemned to being abusive or to being abused. But it is important for us to be self-aware that witnessing domestic violence as a child might have consequences in how we form relationships when we are adults.
Thank you for that, Pamela. And I think in a way that leads to a question that I'll ask around the importance and the impact of having discussions around healthy relationships, because we know we travel every day in life and we have our, you know, our movies, we have our TV, we have now social media, and out of all of that messaging, how much of that is about positive, healthy relationships? And actually, if you stopped sort of anybody in the street and you sort of said to them, can you tell me 10 red flags for an unhealthy relationship? So everyone would be able to give 20 or 30 of those. But if you switch that question and sort of say to yourself, well, what does healthy look like? Can you give me 5 green flags, healthy flags for what looks good? Then that becomes the struggle. So I'm going to jump to you, Rhonda, if that's okay, just talk a little bit about how you are talking about healthy relationships within your services and some of the learning that you've had from the work that you've done.
So I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you say my name. I'm so sorry. So some of the work that we have done, did you say Rhonda or not here?
I did.
Yes.
I did. Sorry, I'll be clearer.
Okay, so thank you. But some of the work that we do in our school programs, I think, is one of the ways that we address this as well, and working with our teens in other programs that we work with here, and helping them to really talk about green flags. Because you're right, it's not talked about. We do have a lot of people who come up who know because they've lived in homes where there's intimate partner violence, so they can identify and they can talk about using aggression, using violence, using manipulation because it's become a way of life for them. However, they've not thought about how to be gentle, how to be kind, how to be communicate, to be able to talk about their feelings. We also, at our program, Women's in the Shelter, we have a battering intervention program, which I know some are called AIPs, abuse intervention programs. We more or less say BIP. And our program is named MENS. It's an acronym for Men Embracing Nonviolence and Safety. And so many of the men in our program are there as witnesses or child victims of intimate partner violence, and they've not learned about relationships. We ask them, where have you learned about relationships? And most of them can't really answer the question, whether it was through, as you mentioned, whether it is through social media, whether it is through friends and peer relationships. It's really difficult to be able to recognize and say, this is what I learned about a relationship, and to particularly have something positive to say about how I'm supposed to treat my partner, when what they've really grown up with was how to get my own way. So a lot of the men who come to the program are learning for the first time, actually, what does power and control, what is that? What do you mean by that? They don't even actually know how to define that, or to define abuse, to define the different types of abuse, particularly for men, because different men, just like children have experienced intimate partner violence in different ways, the men who come to the program have used violence in different ways. It's not always physical violence, as I said earlier. So they really don't understand the impetus of using power and control to get their own way, and how they've used isolation and intimidation and other factors like that. So some of the things that we teach in our school program is with our high school students and middle school students, so are the same things we are teaching to the adult men who come to the battering intervention program, who've absolutely never had the opportunity to learn what is a green flag. We were just talking to a man Tuesday, yesterday. We were just doing it's two of us, actually, myself and the co-facilitator, working with a man. We was really just asking him about relationships. He really couldn't answer the question, and one of his tactics, as you just said, avoidance. For him, he just leaves, but he doesn't recognize that when he leaves, he's not giving respect to his partner. He's not asking that person about their feelings. He just decides, okay, I don't want to argue, and I just leave. So even learning a respectful way to be in and or to leave a relationship was just one of the things we was working with him on. So I think we have to just continue to, I really push that we have to continue to try to reach children at a younger age, because when we're getting them at 14 and older, a lot of times it's trying to undo what they have learned all of their years. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, to be fair, that was sort of leading into my next space was, when we talk about healthy relationships, when should we start talking about it? And if you are in yourself being the parent that is experiencing domestic abuse, domestic violence, how do you start to talk to the children in your life about what they're witnessing and experiencing? Nahar, would you like to start, and then I'll offer it out to everybody else? I think it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. And as Rhonda said, I think it's as soon as possible. And I think as as we've just heard, the younger the better, I suppose, in a way, but there's different approaches. So for example, an approach that we use is called the STAR program, which is supporting trauma awareness and resilience. And it's a whole family approach. So it supports trauma awareness, building resilience for mums and children across refuges. But it's this safe, confidential space where you can unpack your experience of abuse and trauma, but it also looks at mum in terms of kind of breaking those cycles. So looking at new strategies, building resilience, and looking at kind of strengthening relationships. And that's the key, as you said, Lindsay. It is about kind of role modeling healthy relationships. And again, another way we do that, similarly to Rhonda, is is looking at the schools, really, is having that kind of schools-based provision, having that preventative program in schools, whole school approach where you look at emotional well-being. And there's not enough resources really in schools. There needs to be more coordination of this kind of program. So you can look at kind of emotional well-being and talking to young people in schools and in terms of how it can be tailored to them, whatever their experience is, in terms of whether it's domestic abuse. And we know in terms of children experiencing domestic abuse, we know that sometimes their recovery needs are overlooked, when mum comes into the refuge. And that's why I was talking earlier on about the family support. But having a family support worker means that they can focus on kind of what a healthy relationship looks like, therapeutic intervention. So it might be play therapy, family activities, how you create those new bonds with more family activities as well. And also in terms of a phrase that we like to use in Solace is around survivor to thriver. And it's it's great. It's not my term, unfortunately. It's I don't want to take the credit, but it's from an academic colleague. But it's wonderful because it exactly kind of pins that, this is how your journey started, but this is where you can be. And that's what we apply to children as well, to get them at that critical point when they're in safety, when they realize that they're in safety, still early stages, and then work with them in the various interventions. And there are a number that are very successful that we can cite, which like you can talk about what Pamela was talking about in terms of how things impact on you in later life. And I suppose we've got a number of those strategies in place again. Another example is around, we have something called major trauma centres. So the older children, when they might end up in hospital for another reason, another might be gang related, then we have what we call youth crisis independent domestic violence advocates. So they're based in those hospitals across London, but they will talk to the young people about domestic abuse, and why they might have ended up. So there's a whole variety of different kind of initiatives that I think, because as we were started at the beginning of the conversation, every child is different.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Pamela, I'll extend the question to you.
Yes, I think following on what Nahar said in terms of the kind of the general public and some of the bits that I kind of always struck me is in terms of what you said, Nahar, that especially when in many services, you two are blessed of having children's services. Not every shelter obviously offers that kind of support. And addressing, like, children come in and they come, very concerned about their safety. And so addressing their safety and their fears becomes, even though they're not showing it, they might be running around the place, they're full of concerns and of fears. And I think, workers tend to be really, really good at addressing that. The work that Rhonda was talking about addressing healthy relationships, understanding what respect is, what consent, kindness, bullying. There are different ways to work with different groups, right? To talk about the same dynamics of abuse. And I think the most important one for me is we would always see a big sense of confusion about loving both parents. And let them understand that loving both parents is okay, right? It's their father, it's their mother. And people, they come with a whole dynamic. It could be what they are hearing, what they're seeing, what they are experiencing, but assuring them that loving both their parents is okay. If that is not dealt with properly, this will also come, somewhere in life to bite them back. When they become parents themselves, right? When their parents become grandparents. So I think, that's very important.
Thank you for that, Pamela, and thanks for sort of summing up. I would agree with you on that point. I think that often that challenge in that moment is sort of the balance between how do you keep those children safe when we know that the criminal justice system can only do so much and is possible. But then if you don't manage that sort of relationship well, and often the responsibility for that will lie on the fleeing parent, often the mother, to try and navigate that as safely as possible, it has those consequences. And so, like you say, it's, and I'm sure both of you, you know, you've explained it really eloquently, is that you can't not have those conversations in a really open, honest way with a family, and actually having a whole family approach to how do you go forward and manage that is really tough, especially because, you know, we know that in the moments of leaving an abusive partner, you know, the risk to the family is significantly higher. It's at the highest it'll ever be. And there's two conflicting things happening. There's a moment where the abused parent may feel slightly safe and relieved, and I never want to be near that person again. But you have children who are now separated from the other parent and trying to manage that, which can cause an extensive amount of conflict. And I think, you know, if you're working within a service and you have an advocate, you have access to talking therapies, all of that is really useful and imperative. But actually sort of jumping onto the next question is that not everybody who's experienced domestic abuse will have the benefit of engaging with an advocacy service, a shelter, a community-based service. And that so for many, they would have left their abusive partner and sort of continued perhaps working with the criminal justice system, never accessing or into support, or that there's a significant group of people whom are still living in that relationship and are doing their best to keep their children safe. I want to have a conversation about the statement that most parents, mothers in particular, would hear about keeping your child safe if you were living in an abusive relationship. Of all the moms in all the years that I've worked, they have done the most incredible type of safety planning mechanisms to keep those children safe and to keep the children away from what they're experiencing with regards to domestic abuse. So really, as a sort of a first question in that instance, what do you guys think? Are women keeping it safe? And how can we, as the friends, family members, and colleagues of those around people who are still in a domestic abuse relationship with children, help support them to move on and move away? Rhonda, can I start with you first, please?
Yes, thank you. All right, so that's a very good question to really think about. How do I keep my child safe when I'm still in the relationship if I haven't left yet? And I think one part I have to begin with saying is that the first thing we have to recognize is that oftentimes when the family is still intact or still living together, it's because of threats. And we don't want to downplay that at all, that it may be the threat is if you leave me, or if you ever take my son, my daughter, my child, if you ever take my child away from me, I will. And that I will has a lot of different factors and a lot of different components to it. So I will, and it could be I will expose you as a lie that you have told somewhere in the system. You've been in counseling, you've been in mental health. I'll take it to the criminal justice system. I'll get custody of the children. You'll never see them again. That threat can also be, as hard as this is to say, it's also very hard to hear, but it's very true, as that I'll kill you. I'll kill you and the kids. And that is very difficult. So, and that threat is really real. When you're living with someone who has escalated abuse, and we're now beyond of the other types and thinking primarily about physical violence, and you have seen this partner, you've seen this person even escalate the physical violence, that threat becomes very real. So staying in the relationship and keeping the child there is sometimes a protective factor to say that this is the only way I believe in this moment in time that we are going to be able to stay alive. And maybe I've used systems before. Maybe I did leave. And maybe when I left the system, and I'm going to leave that out there as however we want to think about the system, but the system failed me. And I end up back in this situation. And now my abusive partner uses that and holds that over me. And my threat is even greater again because I did try to leave. I did try to get help. So now for the mom doing safety planning, one of the things that we also encourage is having age appropriate conversations with the children and actually coming up with some language that may be very protective for them. For instance, a mom might have something that she would say to a child when she knows it's going to escalate. And what is safest right now is to get the child out the room. We know for sure the children are still impacted If you're living in a home where there's domestic abuse, domestic violence, you are impacted by it. We can't deny that. However, I may think that as the mom, the safest thing I can do is get my child out of harm's way when I know it's escalating and that it's likely going to become more physically violent. So I may have something I say to the child that might just say something like, go look for your red coat. I wanted you to find your red coat yesterday. And my child may recognize the red coat means go to your room, lock the door, and go wherever I told you to go until I can come find you. Right? Red coat might mean call 911, call for help. However, I can have age appropriate language. I don't want to say the same thing to my 4-year-old that I would say to my 10-year-old. So I need to know how I'm talking to them. And then I'm just going to close this by saying also, we need to make sure we're listening to our child, even when we're doing our safety planning, to listen to them to understand their maturity level and where they are. We cannot hide it. Again, they know about it. So as the parent standing there, a part of the safety plan needs to be able to have age appropriate conversations with your child. So they can learn to feel safe around you because they know that you're doing what you can to provide and establish safety for them. So I think that's very important. And those are the things that we can and do talk about with our families at Women's Center Shelter.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I mean, I think you've paused on and you lightly touched on it about what some of those threats look like and what some of those fears potentially are. Nahar, would you like to just go into a little bit of detail about what they are, in particular around some things of immigration, access to income, suitable and stable housing, and the system that we're sort of referring to is so immense and so far-reaching that the impact of it not working for us can be immense. So,
Yeah, no, thank you, Lindsay. And those are all really good points. And the barriers, I suppose, that women experience in terms of how to keep their children safe, when is the right time to go. I mean, I think, I mean, one of the things that I know women get asked a lot is, why didn't you leave? And you know, for those who work in domestic abuse, we know how hard that is, and as Rhonda said, the safety planning that goes into that. But yes, in terms of some of those barriers, I mean, one that's one that's outrageous really, but in terms of for in the UK is not having recourse to public funds, so knowing that you wouldn't be able to be supported even if you did leave in terms of public funding. So that's something that there's a lot of groups within the UK, including Solace and our sister organisations like Southall Black Sisters that have funding available and that are campaigning regularly, to improve that. So, to have money as the reason why you wouldn't leave, that you wouldn't get supported on the other end is an absolute scandal. But that is something that women are facing. And as you said, Lindsay, in terms of housing, I mean, this is a temporary period that you come to a refuge. So, and we have a housing crisis going on in London, which is the area that Solace mainly operates in, and temporary accommodation is very poor and very few and far between. So again, that is something that women experiencing when they're in our refuges. But I suppose one of the areas that we try and work in that needs to be more work done is that awareness raising in other areas. So in order to feel safe, people's friends, women's friends need to be able to advise them and have safety planning with them so that you have somebody who could, if you're ready, if you're at that stage when you are ready to go, the red coat scenario that Rhonda was talking about, then you have a friend who can take you there. So you have that planning in place. We have safe havens, we have places of safety for women. There are a number of initiatives across the country. There's one that takes place in banks at the moment where you can give a name and then you can phone for help. So there's a number of different things. I think we need to have more initiatives in schools. We do that work as well, where mums can come in and speak confidentially to someone. More employers. I did a session the other day with a big corporate in the UK, and it was about this very subject, which is there's somebody, a family friend, somebody in your family who may be experiencing it. What do you do? And I saw the kind of look of horror and shock and tears in this audience of people who had been through the experience, but also, okay, I can do something. So I think as organisations, we can do more of that awareness raising work, and to be funded to do that work as well. And I think the other area that I think is really important is is organizations stepping up in terms of providing those safe havens and places. So I suppose what I'm thinking of is in terms of culturally appropriate services. There are some women who face more barriers, and that could be for cultural reasons. So, for example, we do need religious institutions, for example, to step up and make sure that they have safe spaces and they're giving out the right messages to say enough is enough. You know, you have got somewhere to go. So I think there's a whole range of initiatives to get women to where they need to be. So, Lindsay, yeah, I'm just realised I might have gone off in a tangent, but I hope I
No, but
answered that.
you've answered the question so fully. It's absolutely beautiful, and it leads me into a lovely space to put Pamela on the spot.
Oh,
You know, we've spoken very eloquently about how difficult it is leaving that abusive relationship, and that many women and some men will, you know, do all the safety planning as possible to make sure that they leave at the moment. But for those that sit around that person, the friends, the family and colleagues who are seeing something going on and they are concerned, how do you start the conversation about the fact that your friend, family member or colleague is living in a home experiencing domestic abuse and there are children there? Pamela. I can do that. She's kind.
That's not, it's not easy, but I want to pick for 1 second before I go into how friends and families can act and support. Just pick up on what Rhonda said about different conversations at different ages. We have to understand that, you know, the dynamics also might play a part as they grow, right? So a child might start seeing something since they're babies, and then, you know, they might be in there for years. And so at different stages, the same person might be having different conversations with parents. And I think and that's I think that's important to say. And I want to stress for anybody hearing that at any age children will perceive the violence threat. So this is a big myth that the babies would not know that this is going on. They do because the environment is created, the noise, the fear, the inability of a parent who is absolutely distressed by being something affects directly the children. So I just wanted to put out there. And now to your question, it's very difficult. And I'm gonna sit in the position of a family member or a friend, because your first reaction is wanting to go and grab somebody out of the house, right? Like we want to shout and say, "Oh my God, like get out of there." And we have to see the place where the survivor is at that moment in time. And that's really important, right? Because they might not be in a place where they feel they can leave because of the host of reasons that Nahar said. They might not have the means or the support. They know they cannot stay in your house forever. You might not be even able to accommodate somebody for forever, right? So there could be a host of economic, emotional reasons, and just a completely destroyed self-esteem that might not even enable the survivor to believe that she could make it out there. So it is difficult. I think the most important thing that you can say to a survivor is that you are there. Mm-hmm. You are there for the moment that they're ready, right? Trying to allow them for you to be a free space of judgment, which I know is very, very difficult, because I've sat down as a friend and, you know, as a family member in that other side. And you just want to, you know, grab people out, but it's their process, and you just have to be, you know, make sure that you're there, that you understand the issue, that you believe them, and that, you know, in the case that they want to, you know, leave, do you know which is your nearest service? For example, I always ask this question to people, like, do you know where your nearest domestic violence services, right? So if you know you have a friend or a family, research their postcode. There are several tools in the US and the UK. You have Bright Sky. You can put a postcode in, for example, and you get their nearest service. So it's very important to make sure that you have the information, that you're patient, and that you're a safe space. So those would be my pieces of advice for family members and friends.
Thank you for that. I mean, the other thing that I'd add to that is that if you are concerned about someone, there is also a weight that you carry with your worry for that person,
Mhm.
and that you yourself should access support, reach out to the helplines, hotlines that are available, because you are not alone in being worried and concerned and trying to find that sort of pathway out.
And I will chip in with one more, sorry, because you asked for family and friends, but Nahar was saying she was speaking at a company. Sometimes it's colleagues.
Yeah.
I even had people that said that somebody in the street approached them. All random, right? But it could be a colleague. You might be the first person that this survivor is disclosing that they're facing abuse. And you always have to be prepared out for that question. So, especially in workplace environments where you're near clubs, gyms, all other places, just be prepared.
Really good
Sorry.
point. Thank you. No, it's brilliant. I think before, I know we've only got a little bit of time left, and there are questions that are coming through on the Q&A, so I'll try and weave those in at the same time. We've spoken a lot today about, the experience of children, and there's a lot of weight placed on the victim of the domestic and sexual violence in this minute to be the one that makes the action to make somebody safe. And some of times that message is repeated by the system, by our children and family workers, our social service departments, by our criminal justice systems, by our first responders. And that can be overwhelmingly sort of a massive weight where the responsibility sits on one person alone. So I think there's one, and we've spoken a lot about that once you enter services, you receive such a huge amount of support, and that you can access that. And actually there are programs and work that are sort of going on that are supportive of that. But if you are talking to that adult child, the child that I spoke to earlier on in the day, the one that is potentially unseen in this journey, whom is sort of stuck with what to do next. How do I respond to a parent who's now experiencing abuse? I've aged out of all of these programs and systems. What would you say to them? Nahar, can I jump to you first, and then I'll move on to you, and then end with you, Pamela.
Okay, so sorry, Lindsay, just to be clear, so the question was about what would you say if they're not accessing kind of the services?
If they're an adult child, so that they are of an age where they wouldn't access, they're not in school any longer, they're not in university, so they are less able to access any of these services that we've all spoken about, which are very much for the moment when it is all happening. After that fact, when you are and they're still a child to your parents who've either are still experiencing or enduring domestic abuse, what do you say to that adult child?
Oh,
Where
I
can
see.
this
Thank you.
support? Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood the
No,
question,
it's me.
but
I think I posed it badly.
no, not at all. I think it's a variety of the responses that we've given already. Because if you're an adult and you're witnessing, what's going on in the family home, for some reason you're not acknowledging it, and it is very hard. I don't think anybody in that position would say it isn't, but there is support, advice, help out there in many different forms, whether it's in the UK, it's your local authority, or the Met Police for that reason. But I think it comes back to Pamela's point and what we were saying earlier, that people do pick up the signs in terms of if you're concerned about another family member, or you have been in that cycle and you may be withdrawn, or the most telling example is obviously about the healthy relationships discussion we're having, and there's some kind of issue there. So I think what I mean, I've seen this situation many times actually, and the best thing to do is to remind that person of why they may be experiencing the impact on them, and then how to help that family member. So I think that is, I mean, people aren't in a bubble. I think there is a kind of a discussion that sometimes they are. No man or woman is an island, and I think there are kind of those conversation points to be had. And as I said, having been in that situation myself, and as Pamela said, there's no right time, but when you see a point that's kind of the right point in terms of it's the right day, or you feel that person's ready to engage in that conversation, then you would bring all those factors into it. I mean, that would be from my experience.
Thank you for that. And I think you're right. I think it's knowing that there is never the perfect moment, but there are opportunities. And the best thing that you can do, and sort of leading on from what Pamela has said, is rely on something like the Bright Sky app, the resources that are available, learn enough so that you are able to be that bridge to that specialist support service at a time when it works best. Quite specifically then, Rhonda, what would you say to children adult children who have grown up in homes that they're experiencing abuse, where could they get support from now? And what does that support look like for them?
That is such an interesting question because that was happened to me in my life actually. So in our adulthood, a very good friend of mine who is now transitioned, she's no longer with us on this earth. Then she ended up in a very abusive relationship. Her childhood, growing up in a home where there was abuse, was something we absolutely never talked about directly. I knew, she knew, I knew, but we never talked about it. And so interesting is that when she ended up in a marriage that was abusive, she said to me, Rhonda, I think that you believe my husband is abusive. And I didn't want to come out and say, well, yeah, definitely. So like, okay, now how do I respond? So I said to her, is true. I believe there are different levels. And yes, I believe your husband is at a certain point. And she says, oh, therefore, then I won't talk to you about my marriage. And she didn't. And then many years later, she was ready to get a protection from abuse order. And she called me and said, I need you to take me to get one of those things. I knew exactly what she meant. It was like around 11 o'clock midnight. I went to her house. I took her downtown. Well, in Pittsburgh at that time of day, you have to go downtown to the courthouse. I picked her up. I took her downtown to the courthouse and did what we had to do. But what do I say to an adult friend or an adult person? It depends on what level we are and what trust we have, as well as what opening do you give me. One thing she knew for sure is that I'm going to be here for you regardless. I'm not going to have judgment. And whenever you need me to take you to get one of those things, just call me and I'm going to be there for you. So I think sometimes we live out our message even though we don't speak out our message. So I think there's different ways we can let adult friends know that I'm here for you. And I rarely do this, and I know, but I'll say that I had an adult friend be there for me. I don't often disclose, but I remember an adult friend saying to me when I was in an abusive relationship that when you're ready, I have a space in my home for you. You know, and it was months later that I had to call her, and actually, she was out to lunch. At work, I called her job and I said, when she comes back, just tell her I said, this is the day. So she knew what the message was. So I think there's ways, as I said earlier about a child in a red coat, there's ways that we have code language that lets a person who grew up in a home with intimate partner violence know that I'm here for you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to be here whatever you need and however you need it. I will be that person. So I think that's very important. Now, also, I will say real quickly, a good friend of mine, she uses a direct approach. And I don't, it's not the professional approach. It's not what we're taught when we're doing domestic violence training. But she told her cousin, if you don't get out that relationship, one day he's going to kill you. And I said, oh, I think you could have said that a little differently. But she used the direct approach. So I guess there's different ways we use our language and what we say. But mean what we say is really the bottom line. Whatever you say, make sure you're able to back that up.
I love that. And I think that is so powerful. And actually, we need to say what we can honestly commit to going forward, knowing our own sort of, it's hard with so many people are terrified of opening that tin of worms and sort of seeing the consequences of what happens. But being able to offer that human approach of that, whatever time it may be, you can come to my house and you can use my phones, you can leave all the stuff that you need to leave there. That is something I can genuinely do because the commitment piece is key. I'm going to borrow that statement. I absolutely love it. Pamela, just before we move on to sort of the final question, if you have grown up in a home where you've experienced domestic abuse as a child and now you are an adult, where can you go to seek the support that you may need?
That's a very kind of interesting question. Rhonda, first, thank you so much for sharing. It enlightens us always when we hear lived experience in that way. It's an interesting one because what we get always, and I think I remember hating this when I heard it the first time, is like work on yourself. And nobody ever tells us, how do you work on yourself? Like, I want that kind of answered to me. So I think in trying to kind of discover it, of course, you have options like therapy and groups. Not everybody can afford that. Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody comes from a social kind of condition of background where they want to do something like that. But I think self-caring is very important. For some people, that might mean meditating, journaling, any creative outlets that they have, music or so forth, is very important to engage in something like that. Educating yourself. We are in a time like never before. So when I was a kid, if I wanted to get that kind of information, it would have been more difficult. I would have to go to a library, for example. But now there is so much information out there about, what we were talking of, things like attachment or limerence, or just figuring out what's gone, trying to figure out, educating yourself, reading, learning from specialists. It's another kind of way of trying to understand where you hurt, because that's the process of trying to work on yourself, is figuring out where you hurt and what hurts, what can actually that make you do. And with that, trying to understand boundaries, which are your boundaries, and building relationships that are on the healthier side of the spectrum, because you are vividly every day trying to make sure that you're in that space. It doesn't mean that you won't have an angry day or a bad day or so forth, but you're trying to live your life and support others in that way. I guess that that could put an end also to a cycle, maybe. Many people have come from generations of cycles of abuse, and trying, in a way, if you can find a way out through all of these ways to figure out what's happened to you, maybe
Yeah.
that's, where it ends.
Thank you so much. I think you're so right. I think the sort of last piece that I would say to anyone who's grown up in a home and experience is that it wasn't in any shape or form your fault. And being able to live and own that statement in your soul is incredibly difficult, because everything around you would have been telling you that you had some influence in it, but you had zero influence. The person who was directly experiencing the domestic abuse had zero impact or ability to change the abuse that was coming. So you had even less as that child. Forgive yourself and let yourself off on that piece. And I think then the other one is that, we say it and we tout it in all of our campaigns when we talk about domestic abuse, but you really are not alone. And there are many people out there through different platforms that you can reach out to, and healing in community. And we can see that so evidently from what Rhonda and Nahar has sort of shared today is so powerful. The collectiveness of coming together and sharing experiences and being able to sort of bounce off each other with the positive energy is so useful. So if you can access any of those community groups, they're really powerful. There are some that are on Facebook, and if you are in a position to start any of them, link with your local domestic abuse, domestic violence shelter to make sure that it's done safely and in support, and that can be a massive piece. Before we finish for the day, because I know we've gone over, I want to ask one final question, and I think this is always a lovely question to end on. And Nahar, I'm going to start with you. Is that for the survivors that are listening, what words of encouragement or advice would you offer them as they navigate their journey? Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Oh, my apologies. I think what I would advise them is it's worth the stress. When you're thinking about leaving and the journey that you'll have to go on, and the impact on your children in terms of leaving whatever what they know, is it's worth it for that, that temporary stress and concern you have, because going back to the survivor to thriver, that's what you will have as an outcome, in terms of you will be less frightened, you will be able to move away from this dangerous situation. I mean, it's not what everyone wants to hear, so again, the timing has to be right, but I've had that conversation a number of times, and genuinely people have responded positively to it when it's when it's not the right time, when it is the right time, when it has been the right time. They've acknowledged that yes, it was worth that that perseverance and having that plan in place, and all the things we talked about in the session today. Thank you.
Rhonda, what would you say to that survivor?
Thank you. I would really say that it's never too late, regardless of what age you are. So what, you're 47 and you've never talked about it. It's still okay to talk about it. And I think I like what Pamela said as well, is to start journaling. If you're not ready to talk about it out loud yet, write it down, read it out loud to yourself. And you know what? Look in the mirror and look at yourself as you say this. Encourage yourself Find words that you can use that will help you feel better on your healing journey. And don't listen to all the naysayers about that. And don't listen to the people who tell you, oh, just get over it. You're safe now. You're out of it. Like, because I may be safe physically and maybe living somewhere different, and the abusive person may not even still be living. It doesn't matter. I still am carrying that. So the catchphrase that I would use also is, you can do give in, but don't give up. Give into your feelings, give into your thoughts, give into the moment, live in that moment, but don't give up. You still have time to heal, and you still deserve to feel healed and loved and appreciated. Thank you for that opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. Pamela.
I can't top that, Amanda. I think this idea that we can heal, that it does not matter, that we're not alone, and that we can see it now in so many ways. Again, I as much as I'm, sometimes a critic of these times, we have so many advantages, so many people sharing their story, sharing what's happened. You can see, 20 years ago, I was a court advocate, and I was doing, protection orders, Rhonda, in a court. And I could see how stories had a lot of similarities because I could see this bulk of them, but almost nobody had a chance to see that. But now there is so much information out there, and people sharing and willing to, understand that they support others whilst they support themselves in a way. I think that's very important. So not alone, there is time to heal. And it's great that you have an interest on, hearing a conversation like this. And that would be my message.
Thank you so much. I'm going to end the session. I want to say a massive thank you to Nahar for joining us. Rhonda, thank you so much for sharing so much about you and your lived experience. It's really, like Pamela, echoed, it's really grateful for that. And Pamela, of course, it's always lovely continuing our office chats in a more wider space. But I want to finish with a comment that actually came through via our Q&A, which I think is really lovely, which said very clearly that they've enjoyed the session because we've sort of had a global approach to it. We've had 2 different countries and sort of different types of services sort of speaking about the way in which they would respond, and it's really resonated. And the fact that the survivor to thriver is now going to be the #1 voted statement of today's session. And I'm going to borrow that, and I love that too, because that's really what it is, isn't it? We're all on this journey, and how we travel that journey is different. But what we do know is that who walks beside us, who carries us at times, and sometimes they may push us up the hill, those are the people that really count, and that there actually is a huge network globally, locally, of women and men who are all ready to respond if you do make that disclosure and you do need support. A massive thank you for everyone who's joined. It's really lovely to see people still engaging. We love the comments and feedback. Part of the work that we do at No More is always about raising voices and encouraging these conversations. We know that they can't always happen in the same way. If you can join us on Tuesday for the No More Tech Summit. But other than that, join us again at the end of March for our next session around the Global Dialogue Series. We'll be digging into coercive and controlling behavior, in particular around economic abuse. So a massive thank you again for Pamela, to Rhonda, and to Nahar for joining us and gifting us your time and your knowledge and expertise. I am bowled over with everyone's sort of feedback and comments and questions. So a big thank you from me, and on behalf of our audience, an even bigger thank you. So see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody.